Okay. I may not.
To open our conference, we're going to blow the shofar.
I may not.
Hugo Lamontagne. Very good, very good. Our feature speaker for this evening is none other than Eric Bissell.
I came across an interesting verse. We were looking at Exodus chapter 3, which is known as the burning bush incident. And in verse 4, it says that Yahuwah saw that Moshe turned aside to see, and Elohim called out to him from amid the bush and said, Moshe, Moshe, and he replied, Here I am. The verse right before that, Moses thought, I will turn aside now and look at this great sight. Why will the bush not be burned? So, perhaps tomorrow we'll get into more of the chapter 3 of Exodus here. But an interesting thing, there was a place, other verses that I've noticed where Yahweh very particularly says that he heard our voice and then he responded. Here he says that he took note that Moshe saw something and turned to go look at it, and Yahweh noticed that. Now, according to a certain Calvinist doctrine of predestination, everything's already mapped out. We only do the things that we've already been, you might say, orchestrated or programmed to do. And some people say, well, maybe we're not predestined to do every little detail, but the Almighty knows everything we're going to do, and we can't really vary from that. We have free choice, but then it's a matter of semantics of how do you define free choice. But that everything is locked in, and that so that the Almighty already knows everything. But here's a verse. Why is it there? Why does this verse say that Yahweh himself noticed or saw that Moshe noticed this thing and then went to go look at it? I suggest that the way the words are written in Hebrew are for a couple different reasons. First of all, it's very particular. It's not just telling part of the story. When it says that Yahweh noticed, or Yahweh perceived, or considered, or took to account, very particularly, hey, Moses is looking at this thing, is that it provides an open door or an opportunity for Yahweh to then take the next move. It's like you're playing a game of chess. You maybe have a great plan, but if the other guy doesn't play into your setup, your move, then that's going to change your plans. And that Yahuwah is observing what we're going to do, which is to say, if we behaved otherwise, then some other plan might have gotten kicked into action. If we believe that everything that works in human history has already been mapped, then we're just passengers on the bus going along for the ride. If we choose to believe that we are sentient beings, thinking, determining, making decisions, and implementing actions that could go this way or that way, and depending on what we do, it's going to affect by changing the universe, altering the course of history by our very personal, specific actions. That's a game changer. That everything's different if that's the reality. So one thing I've noticed is that based on the doctrine, call it in a a big kettle to put everything in, the predestination doctrine, versus the what if the Almighty is surprised by what we do and is just waiting to see what it's going to be, put that into the other kettle. Those are two very big camps of doctrinal perspective. We will conduct our life differently depending on which of those two we choose to believe. There's an event where just after the Exodus 3, where Yahuwah meets up with Moshe and says, go back into the land of Egypt and go speak to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go, and such is going to happen, and then you're going to come back to this mountain and worship me, which is what happened. And then Yahuwah says to his people, I have prepared the land of Canaan for you to just walk in and receive what's been 430 years in the making, from when he talked to Abraham and said, your people will come back and possess this land. And here's the real event. And the people of Israel send out the 12 spies, and 10 of the spies looked at the size of the people, the size of the cities, the types of weapons, and said, we don't have a chance. They actually said, was there not enough graves in Egypt that Yahweh should drag us out here to the desert and kill us here so he could bury us in the desert? Is that what's going on here, really? And 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb. The word Yahshua means Yahweh saves. That's not just a doctrine, but that's the testimony of a belief, a reality. I choose to believe that Yahweh, my Elohim, saves. He said he would, he does, he will, and that's where I stand. Period. That's a statement. Kalev means all heart. It's also the word for dog, but it means all heart. Kal lav, all heart. He says in Deuteronomy 30, when all these things have come upon you, the blessing and the curse, which is to say, when he's speaking to the future generation, here we are, this is us. Deuteronomy 30, I believe, is talking about us here today, 2018, where we stand, we have the vantage point of history. We can look back at a guy named Usher calculated at least 6,000 years. Some believe there was more, that's another matter, but the point is, you can see at least 6,000 years worth of chronological, generational history in the Bible. And we can look back and see it played out just like he said. Just like it was foretold, it's happened. So here we stand looking at the blessing and the curse, and then Yahuwah says, speaking to Moshe, Deuteronomy 30, he says, then you will return to these words with all your heart and with all your soul, which is your thinking. Your nafshakah is the word for soul, your soul. So your nephesh, your mind, your calculating, your determining, your resolution, and your heart is with your gusto. The word meod is translated as very. So there's these depths of your being to return to love him, which is to regard his words are true, and say, I determined to stand here. So Joshua and Caleb were the only 2 spies that said, he brought us here to give us the blessing, to give us the land. The other 10 spies said, no, he brought us out here to kill us. And I'm paraphrasing, but Yahweh basically says, don't keep saying that. If you keep saying that, that's what's going to happen. And they kept saying it. So it's like, okay, that's it. After 430 years of preparation, he said, the entire generation of adults old enough to know better and to make the decision, they're going to die in the desert just like they just said. And the very children they said that they were afraid would be fodder for the giants, they will go into the land and eat the food off the giants' tables. Just like Yahweh said. What he said, he will do, but it seems like he needs, or certainly at least desires, our attitude to collaborate. And if we think that he's running the show, he's driving the bus, he's orchestrating world history, we got nothing to do about it, we're all just victims of circumstance, and that whatever was going to happen is going to happen, whatever he determined to happen can't be altered from happening, then we're going to live our lives, think our thoughts, utter our prayers, and have a resolution within us as, well, yeah, I'm good with the program, let's just take it. That doesn't seem to be the story that I read about. What I read about is that Yahweh saw the attitude of Caleb and Joshua, Caleb and Joshua, and said, because they had a different spirit about them, a ruach, they will go into the land and experience my provision. Every single other one of these nearly 3 million people are going to die without entering. Our attitude changes everything. There's a certain word, tikva, tav, kuf, vav, hey. This is the root of the word here, kuf, vav. It's a word that's simply translated as hope. But kuf, vav is also a string or a line under tension. So the idea that hope makes something happen. So here, let me ask you a question. There's a New Testament verse, I believe it's in 2 Corinthians 13, and he says, where there's prophecies, they'll cease, and where there's this and that, that'll cease, but there yet remains these three, faith, hope, and love. Familiar with the verse?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard a lot of talk about faith. I've heard sermons in the past, have faith in your faith. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. Faith is the evidence of things
Not seen.
not seen, the things that are hoped
The
for.
substance of
The substance of things that are hoped for. So, our faith, from a Christian perspective, is really the essence of what our life is about. In love, you could say, well, 1 Corinthians 13 is all, that's the love chapter, and people quote that at weddings all the time, and that's about a kind of an attitude we're supposed to have. But what is the nature of hope? What is the hope for? What is the hope of? What is it in? And how do you do it? So can I ask for anybody to contribute an answer to that? How about you, Doug? Could you answer what's... Oh, I knew he was going to call me. When you think of it, when you hear the word hope, what is that about?
Well, it's difficult to explain because the intrinsic value is like unattainable to describe, to like narrow it down to...
Okay, the reason I brought this up was because of that reason. What I found, and just throwing this question out to a few other people, and I put you on the spot, now I'm relieving the spot from you. What I found is that this hope is rather nebulous. So John, you're an astronomer. Nebulosity is, boy, that's outer space.
Crazy.
What do you see when you have
Turn
the
the
word
light on then.
hope? What is the nature of hope?
Hope is an expectation.
An expectation. In what? For what? How do you do that?
What is to come.
How do you do that?
When you look at what you expect to happen, and then look forward to that occurring.
Looking forward.
And then the decisions you make, the choices you make, the steps you take are all towards that expectation.
So there's an interesting thing about what you're saying is that you could say that gazing into the future, see, the letter Kuf is the back of the head, or it's the sun on the horizon, or it's that which follows, that which comes next, that which is... So you could say, well, if we just hope. I saw a play called Finding Neverland with some friends a little bit ago. It's very interesting. It's about the man who wrote the Peter Pan story. And the very end of the play, it wasn't about Peter Pan, it was about the man. But at the very end of the story, it's all, you just got to believe, you got to believe. As if there was some point to everything he wrote about just believe. Well, You can believe in anything. That doesn't make it true. You can hope for any fanciful, imaginary anticipation. I hope I get to go to the ocean. I hope I get to go to Disneyland when I'm 10 years old. I hope I can see that movie before it comes out of the, leaves the theaters. I hope I get healed. Those are all hope, and they're all under tension, but is that tikva? You mentioned under tension. There's something about the word, or the word that's spelled with a kuf. If you have a dot and you pull a line, and then you pull this line with some tension from this end, okay, so you have a straight line. Well, technically a string with a line, that's the word kavah. That's the word for hope. But now if you drag this string around in a circle, now what have you done? You've created a zone using that string as a radius. And that's still also concepts that have to do with kufav. Now if you had a different length of a string, if it was shorter you get another circle, if it was longer you get another circle, and pretty soon you get a, hey, that's a target. Well, I'm trying to show you something that's involved with reading into the Hebrew, is that there's something about a zone which has to do with this word kavah, which is the root of the word for hope, which has to do something with a target and has something to do with this line under tension. If you don't pull that radius line tight, you're not going to get a circle drawn from it. There's a verse that says that he will give us teaching line upon line, precept upon precept. The word spelled line is kuf vav. So he says kufav kufa. That's translated line upon line. And then it's spelled zadi vav, and that's precept upon precept. Well, the vav is a masculine suffix which basically means he or it, or sometimes it even means they, theirs. So the letter, whether it's a kuf or a zadi, pretty much stands alone as being the message. This is where the message is. Well, if you look at the word, to look at this zadi for a moment, if you look at the word zadi yod, or zadi vav, or zadi yod vav, or even if you add a nun, this is the word Zion, like Mount Zion. The zadi yod is the zadi vav itself is a command. It's like the commander of a ship giving an order and it's done. So this concept of zadi vav, if he says something about Mount Zion, Eddie Chumney did a talk a few years ago saying there's about a dozen different definitions of Zion. One of the definitions of Zion is kind of like mythological Camelot of King Arthur's era, like Mount Zion, the city of the great king, or maybe Zion's the New Jerusalem, or maybe Zion's in heaven, or maybe Zion is David's kingdom, or there was actually a mountain which is no longer there. They bulldozed it and excavated it and removed it centuries ago. But the point is, Vav Nun is the suffix of one who's engaged in the action of doing what? Doing it, what he commanded, or this is like my command or my order. So you could say Zion is actually those of us who are about the business of doing what Yahuwah said just because he said so. He ordered it, he commanded it, and we do it, and that's the end of that. Mount Zion is, if it's a place, if it's a city, if it's a kingdom, it's composed of the people who are about doing what he said. That definition I've never really seen exercised in people talking about Mount Zion. It's always just quoted as Mount Zion. It's like we just think of it as this, like I say, it's almost like a mythological kingdom of Camelot. What's Kufa? It's what he said to hope for. There's a verse where he said, I have given you a future and a hope. So the hope is the very thing which he said he is going to do. So the fact that you've got the alphabet letters, we'll go back over them just real quick. Aleph, that's first person, self-referential. So Aleph represents the fact that somebody, whoever it is, writing out this expression is saying, this is me, I'm the guy, and this is what I'm going to do. Bet, the first letter of the Bereshit, Genesis, starts with the letter Bet, so you could say it means house, it means object, it's a noun, so it's the material universe. So I could read Ab, it not only means father, but Avah, if you put a hey here, Avah is to wish or desire or to refuse something, so it's the attitude of the one who is the father, who is the one who has the attitude. So Aleph Bet could be read as the one that we refer to as the Father is the one who made the heavens and the earth, because he had a purpose and a plan and an agenda. Gimel is to send something in motion. If Bet's a noun, Gimel's the verb, and it means also to project or to send out. The word shalach, shin lamed chet, is to shoot out like a missile, or to divorce, or to send out a messenger, to take your plans and say, make it so, get it done. You're projecting, you're launching. So to launch from the house, Bet means house, you could say to launch from the Father's house to where? Dalet, well, Dalet is the number 4. There's nowhere that it says earth equals number 4, but the concept of refer to earth things as a matter of 4, such as north, south, east, west, winter, spring, summer, fall, solid, liquid, gas, plasma, 4 states of matter. The idea of 4-ness is kind of earthiness. So we could say, well, okay, so I'm going to project this, focusing attention on the earth. Hey is to reveal. It's the word for the, so this is to specify. Vav is a nail or a peg, but it's also some kind of a connector, which could be a type of bridge. It's the number 6. And in Revelation it says 6 is the number of man, but what does that mean? It doesn't mean this is a man. It could be talking about a function of man. Then you have Zion, which is a weapon. And then you have Het, which is a fence. Tet, which is something round. And then you have Yod, which is a hand that causes something to be done. It's almost like this excavator bucket. Another way to draw it would be something like that. So you can figure here's a tractor with its excavator arm. So Yod at the end of a word is the suffix meaning my. So I can look at this as saying, if this is referring to I, and the Yod is referring to my or myself, then these 10 letters are a statement of something that I'm going to do. So to say, I, who made the physical universe, am somehow going to conduct my plan, myself, my purpose, my intentional effort of this whole engagement to be put into the cosmos material form. This is known as the letter with a foot in modern Hebrew. To give myself a foot to travel to the earth, to walk the earth as a man who will then be put to the weapon, so that's the place of the crucifixion, be put into a tomb, the round rock rolled in front of it, and then the seal put on it, locked shut. Now I'm just appropriating the value of letters pictographically to those first 10 letters, and I can read there the story of Yeshua. Now, there's been a lot of talk, here's 2018, there's been a lot of talk about people saying every prophecy in the Old Testament that the Christians claim is a prophecy about the Messiah is bogus. It's counterfeit. It's not really a prophecy. It's all convoluted. It's not true. That's what they're saying about the so-called prophecies in the Old Testament. Furthermore, there's a fellow named Michael Brown and another associate of his, Michael Heiser, who sit there and say, these Paleo-Hebrew letters are nothing but squiggles. Here's a squiggle. What's that a picture of? Here's another squiggle. Hey. And they're mocking and saying these are nothing but symbols of phonetics. It's like, well, that's not true. We're not going to go into the whole detail because there's plenty of other videos that we've done. But every one of these pictures says something about the event that I just described. This is the ox head. This is the house that looks like a tadpole shape, that looks like a mind and an arm or a backbone being formed. There's the letter with a foot. There's some type of a door. This is hey. If you draw the letter hey looking this way, which other people do. Bob is a nail, or a man is a man standing with his arms up like this. Zion is a weapon. It could be drawn like this, which is an ancient form of the Zion, which is a plowshare. You pull the plowshare this way and it'll leave 2 furrows in the earth. It's the plowshare that the Romans drug across Yeshua's back to rip his skin off his back when they were flogging him. And then he was put into a tomb and a big round rock rolled in front of it, which was particular for that era and that place. Now, for a guy like Michael Brown or anybody else to say, I don't see those pictures in those letters, then it's like, well, tough. You can choose to not see them if you don't want to, and we won't elaborate this, but I'm trying to make a point. There's ways to read the pictures which I can't prove any more than the logic and the self-expression of saying those pictures can be strung together to read about the one that it's in reference to, the Aleph, somehow putting himself or his plan into the manifest bet form. And for somebody to say, oh, that means Jesus Christ is the Father. No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that Jesus Christ is the Father. As a matter of fact, the guy that's in the category of Aleph in Deuteronomy 4 and various other places said, you saw no form, not male or female, not an animal or a plant or a fish or a bird or a reptile. You heard only a voice. So I'm suggesting what we should worship is the voice, the giver of the voice. No manifest example. For himself to somehow put himself into the bet form is not telling us to worship the bet form. But he's put something into the bet form, and if the bet form comes down with a foot to walk the earth that looks like a man, does that mean we're supposed to worship the man as the Father? The Christian church have done this for 2,000 years. Is that appropriate? He said, worship the voice. When Yeshua was here, when he was leaving, he says, I am going back to my Father and your Father. I'm going to my Elohim and your Elohim. He didn't claim to be the Father. He didn't claim to be Elohim. In the book of Acts, chapter 2, and then on into chapter 14, the disciples, the apostles, met together, said, we took note that Elohim did miracles through this man, Yeshua, who was put to death and who then rose from the dead. They did not acknowledge him as God or God the Father, even in the book of Acts. That is what has become of the Christian church through the last 2,000 years. What this whole study is going back to the original language and saying, what are we supposed to be doing? What were we supposed to be doing? The Israelites were not supposed to be looking at how big the giants were and going, gosh, our Elohim, who just wiped out Egypt and the Pharaoh, drowned them all in the Sea of Reeds, dragged us out here, was just so he could kill us in the desert. Thanks a lot. No, that's what they were not supposed to be doing, and they got in trouble and had to spend 40 years dying in the desert because that's what they chose to believe. If they chose to believe with Joshua and Caleb that no, he brought us out here, Moshe even said, he brought you out here to elevate you, to lift you up. That's why he did these things. To give you the blessing. That's his heart. Listen to his words and believe him. And all the people said, no. And for the last 2,000 years, if you go back to King David, it's been the last 3,000 years, the people of Israel have done the same stupid stuff, which is more rotten than stupid. It's a great offense against the ab, the avah, the will, the desire, the intention of our Father. What we're supposed to be doing is believing that he had a plan, and whatever these first 10 letters are, happens to describe the story of Yeshua coming here, being put to death, like I say, the cross, putting into the tomb, and then without going into greater details, there's Kaf and Lamed, let's call that day 1, Mem and Nun, let's call that day 2, a collection of Samek, I, and Pei, call that day 3. He was in the tomb 3 days and 3 nights, and then Zadi, he resurrected. The same letter Zadi is right here. It has to do with a picture of Aaron's rod that budded that was put in the Ark of the Covenant. It's a sprouting back to life. Something absolutely impossible is manifest.
Pat, come here.
After the letter Zadi, there's a Kuf. And then the following letters are Resh, Shin, and Tav. So if he, Yeshua, this guy, was in the tomb
Down.
3 days,
Lay down.
and I just say there's a collection of 3 items here, 3 days and 3 nights, then what happened is this resurrection event. After the resurrection event, what did he do? He hung around for 40 days, and then he ascended. He just floated up into the clouds, disappeared. And his disciples sat there looking and going, well, look at that. What the? And this angel showed up and said, oh, what are you guys looking at? What do you mean, what are we looking at? He just rose from the dead and floated up in the sky, and you're asking a question like that? He said, he's coming back the same way. Now, the reason why making it kind of dramatic is because some of these Bible verses we read sound ridiculous. An angel shows up and says, why are you guys looking into the sky? It's like, gosh, it's to highlight the Kuf. This is the Kuf. Okay. It comes after the Zadi. And because Kuf comes after Zadi, our hope is based on what the Zadi just told us. So I'm suggesting that we find within the Aleph Bet where we get the pieces of the puzzle to put the story together. It's in the alphabetic letter sequence. So when he ascended up, so Kuf there, here's an ascension. That's the ascent. And the Melech, the angel, said, he's coming back the same way. That's way in the future. They thought it was near in the future. Here it is 2,000 years later, still in the future. And in the future, when he comes back, so Kuf is like this. He's at ground zero. He rises up into eternity somewhere. And then when he comes back, he gathers his hosts. You see that in Revelation 19. And he comes back to the same spot. So this vertical line and circular line is a picture. It's where we get our letter Q. It's a picture of the upper, it's almost like the top of a helicopter rotor, right? With the propeller that goes around on the top. It's also a picture of like a billowing smoke that was over the camp of the Mishkan. And like this pillar of fire that was like this lightning bolt coming down. So here you have like a question mark billowing, and then this big exclamation point. So I draw the letter Kuf as like a question mark, exclamation point, billowing, pillar of smoke and pillar of fire. That's where that motif comes from. The point is, after that is Resh Shin Tav, where there's the word to be licensed, authorized, and permitted. Well, when he comes back and everything is made new, that's another part of the story that we haven't even bumped into yet. So what we have here is his plan from the very beginning of I will make the heavens and the earth. Bereshit, chapter 1. And then there's the plan to come down here to the earth as a man who will die, resurrect, ascend, and then come back later and finish the story. So we're still in here somewhere. Well, where are we? According to after Yeshua left and then he's coming back, we're somewhere in this zone. Samek Ayin Pei would be a little bit sooner. What I'm saying is that if we look at the story of Yeshua, he's already resurrected, Kuf went up, but he hasn't Kuf come back yet. So we're between Zadi and Kuth.
Okay, yes.
However, there's another way to read this story, in that it's not just about Yeshua. These pictures mean other things. Yeshua is the quintessential Israel man, the archetype of Israel. So if this is also a similar story, a fractal pattern to the story of Israel, so Yahweh appeared to Abraham, put him into Egypt, a place of bondage, set them free, said he'd lift them up, but they rebelled. They got captured, but he said, when you guys come back to these words later, with all your heart and all your soul, I'll give you back the land. That's the same story. To give you a future and a hope. That's what he said. I told you, I told your forefathers, believe me what I say. They didn't. They had no hope. There was a story of the First Nations people here up in the Sioux. Back 100 years ago, they lost their hope. Back in the days of Red Cloud and Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull and Custer and all those guys. They were betrayed so many times. Nature was against them. Different calamities happened. The U.S. government lied to them, ripped them off, stole their land, made treaties, broke them, on and on and on. But the point is, it says, there's a certain guy, Black Elk, he says the heart of the nation was broken. The circle was broken. We lost our hope. Nothing to hope for. Ezekiel 37 uses the same phrase. The whole house of Israel is represented by these dry bones. It says, our hope is lost. And Yahweh turns around, he says to Ezekiel, speak to these dry bones. These dry bones are the whole house of Israel. And he speaks to them, flesh comes back on them, they come back alive, and he puts them back into the land. My point is, the very specific tikvah that he gave us to hold on to was not an arbitrary anticipation or something difficult and meaningless to describe, but that's what I found, is that in talking to random people, nobody really has quite the definition of hope. But he gave us that the tikvah we should have is the restoration of his favor to his people on the face of this earth, not just in the by and by, when you go to heaven after you die, and that whole thing, which is also another way to read this story.
Amen.
But the concept is, on this earth, there's the promise of the restoration. Now, the interesting thing about hope, it's a tight string. What happens when you take a tight string and you put it under more tension? And then you bump the string? You get sound. A guitar string, a piano string. The tighter the tension, the different sound we get. So this concept of this conference that we're going to have here for a couple days is about energy, sound. Sound and light, from what I understand, are the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. Sound is 40,000 times slower than light. But the phenomenon of both sound and light are identical. So you could say music and color are very specifically related. If we hope, we think we're just having an inner attitude. But the problem with that is that whether I hope or don't hope, I just think, oh well, it's just an event going on inside me, a cerebral moment. But I don't think that's true. Because the same way that he made the physical universe and then became it and appeared as a man, he made the earth, which he then formed into a man. He then breathed into his man his ruach, which, as we've described before, I believe is the alphabetic letters, because the word ruach means expanse and spreading out and ventilation and to give air. So the same word ruach, to give air, he gave his ruach to Adam. The same word ruach also means mind. So the expanse between Aleph and Tav is the 22-factor equation, the 22-letter name, the 22-letter disposition of his attitude, that he put into man by breathing and then by speaking to Adam. So somehow our consciousness, our ruach, is calibrated these 22 letters. And if we hope for what's in the message of the 22 letters, I believe it projects, whether we hear it or see it, like a sound wave. It puts something into the universe that he sees. It says he heard his people's voices when they were in agreement. Read Malachi 3:16. People who feared Yahweh and regarded his name got together, had some meetings just like this, and talked about his Shem. Word Shem is name, fame, renown, reputation. That's what this is. This is his Shem. For us to sit here and talk about his stuff, he takes note. Malachi 3:16, 17, he says, bring a scroll. Write down the names of those people that are thinking about my name. He listens to our voice. He sees what we do. He took note when Moshe simply said, hey, I want to see what's going on. The fact that we're looking at his letters, looking at what he built in the universe with frequency, vibration, energy, and saying, hey, let's look a little closer. Something's weird about that. Moshe looked, excuse me, he saw a fire. That's the essence of something immaterial, plasma. And he saw a bush. That's something of material essence. We'll look at this later, not tonight, but the word bush is spelled Samik Nun Hey. Sanah. Moshe took a look at that and he said, something's wrong. The bush should be consumed by the fire, or if the bush isn't fueling the fire shouldn't be allowed to burn. Something is odd here. Hey, I'm going to stop and take a look. He stopped to take a look, and Yahweh says, oh, look, Moses is taking a look. Now we can engage him. And it says that there was a malach, an angel, who came down and spoke to Moshe, or revealed something to Moshe in the midst of this Samik Nun Hey. Samik is a picture of a backbone, or like a picture of a tree shape. Some kind of an arbor, like a rose arbor that you let the rose climb on. Noon is something that's alive. It's a sprout. So you could say the geometrical model of how a plant grows and develops. How you read that, that's the letter Hey, how it appears. From the midst of the Samik Nun Hey, the angel spoke to Moshe. We'll go on about this later, but somehow it says Moshe was contemplating the matters of his life and thinking about the language, stopped to look at why is not the fire consuming the bush, and then Yahweh said, now we've got his attention, now we can speak to him and get this message through to him. So I believe that for us to ponder his stuff sets up a frequency of the vibration of our cells, our consciousness. Natalie was saying in British Columbia that thoughts can be registered 20,000 miles away. There's experiments where you look at something and it changes the experiment. Shooting photons through a cannon, as it were. How can you change the effect of photons hitting a target by looking at it? We don't know the effect that stuff has. So what we're going to do, not tonight, but tomorrow and the next day, is we're going to go through a list of a bunch of different things. That is proof that there's something going on that we don't really know about. Linda told us earlier about food, raw food, green drink, having a certain frequency of vibration in the cells that if you heat it, it changes it. Whether it kills it completely, we talked about microwave. Does microwave kill it? It changes it. John could tell us a little bit about that maybe tomorrow. The point is, whatever we intake, whether it's sunlight, if we're standing on the earth versus standing on concrete, it changes us. If you listen to certain music, keyed to 432 versus 440 versus 417, it has an effect on your being, on your mind. But at the same time, as you can change what you eat, change what you think, change what you say, change what you listen to, change the color of the spectrum of light, the wavelength of light. They have different, OT lights, or they have different colors of Kelvin degrees rating for fluorescence or LEDs. Everything is going to have an effect on you and how you think and what you do. So if you are actually I was going to say a generator, but it's more like you're a cannon. You can project with your eyes, with your thoughts. You can project your energy to affect the universe. And yet, does that sound like Christian Science? Does that sound like Scientology? Does that sound like Kabbalah or some form of witchcraft or some sort of New Age woo-woo? They might all be aware of something that we've always been told is such bad stuff, stay away from it, it's not real. What I'm suggesting is that what Yahweh made is real. If Yeshua, the guy that walked the earth 2,000 years ago, is this fellow who's represented by these 22 letters, then for Jewish rabbis to tell their people he didn't exist. He's a scumbag. He's burning in hell right now. Pay no attention to that man. If that's what they're saying and this is really about Yeshua, then they're deceiving their people. For the Christian church, because of this man that they call Jesus, to have walked the earth 2,000 years ago, and them to tell their people it's illegal to keep the Moedim of Leviticus 23, and we will kill you. I was just talking to a friend the other day. One of his ancestors was burned at the stake by the Catholics back in the French Huguenot era because he let the people at his church read the Bible. It was illegal to have the people at the church read the Bible, so he was burned at the stakes by the church authorities. I'm trying to show us that we can read the actual words, not translated words. You can read the actual words from the ancient Paleo-Hebrew that the Almighty had Moshe write by looking at the pictures. The truth is to be had, but the truth has been kept from us for thousands of years. And when the Christian church changed the Moedim, making them illegal according to Leviticus 23, and then gave us replacement Moedim of Sunday, Christmas, Easter, Halloween, and various other holidays, they perverted, stifled, and distorted to the point of being not only unproductive, but counterproductive. They brought in death where Yahuwah had intended life in the keeping of his Moedim. And for us to even contemplate his Moedim sets up a frequency of vibration in our minds, in our hearts, which then if we keep it, we're synchronizing with the truth. Going back to Deuteronomy 30 so that that can happen, which plays into Daniel chapter 2, the stone hitting the feet. We'll talk about that later. So there's numerous things that I'm going to mention here throughout the next couple days, just for the record. So if anybody wants to know about these things, I'm not going to elaborate. For example, the book of 528 by Len Horowitz, talking about the solfeggio scale as discovered or given to Dr. Joseph Paleo. You can read the book. I'm not going to elaborate. I'll mention it. Somebody can go look it up. The 432 hertz versus the 440 hertz. There's hertz of the A note. There's plenty of that on the internet. It's different than the solfeggio. Dr. Jason Lyle with the Mandelbrot set. We talked about that. There's a bunch of other things we'll mention. My point is, this being this energy conference, we're going to mention things that the other guys won't mention. Len Horowitz, I haven't heard him encourage people to keep the Moedim or learn Hebrew. That's what this is about, encouraging you to regard the Moedim, regard the name Yahuwah, Yod He Vav He, and learn his words of Hebrew, because it will change the frequency that your cells vibrate at, which just might affect the entire universe, because we are Elohim, according to what Jesus, Yeshua, is quoted as saying. Meaning we are powerful, effective beings, and everything we think and everything we do and everything that we look at and attend to, like Yahweh noticing that Moshe noticed the bush, everything has an effect. And if we don't think it does, we will conduct our life differently and we'll be the worse off for it. And hopefully what we'll address during the time of this conference is to discuss the things that will make a difference for us, for our generation, for the world, for our country, for our people, for Israel, and I think will affect the guys that have been running the show as if there was no plan. But Yahweh even said, there's this other verse where it says, the mistress of Babylon sits on her throne looking around and saying, look, there's no contenders, it's only me. Nobody else can even come close, and thinking, gosh, I rule. But then Yahweh says, you forgot that I promised a future for my people. A future. Achar. Tikva. If we have no tikva, we can't put that string under tension. And I believe that us engaging, actively hoping that this kuf, following this sadi as modeled by Yeshua, is because this is not just a story of Yeshua, it's a story of Israel, it's a story of us, his people. And if we actively hope that what he said is true and will be true in our day, in our era, right here in front of us, the end of the 2,730-year curse, 2010, we're inside. We're out of that envelope of the curse. We're inside the zone, the target zone. Here we are. For us to hope, because we understand his words, is different than an empty, arbitrary hope. And I believe that this stuff is very real and very powerful, and so we'll, as I say, we'll discuss it and see that we can maybe affect things here shortly. But we have to be of sound mind and fit body. Yahweh Rafka!
Thank you, Eric.
Hallelujah.
More tomorrow.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything you want to throw in to say? No? Okay, then tomorrow. To Manana.
Yeah, stop calling on me.